Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I want to introduce our first guest today, and I have seated next to me Mr. Lance Parvin. Lance, welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
You have a rather impressive resume. You are a motivational speaker, you are a health instructor, and you also teach self-defense.
Guilty as charged.
Okay, we'll talk about that. What's your grassroots beginnings in physical fitness?
Okay. It's funny, when I was in high school, I started doing track. So I started with pole vaulting, and I got interested in this, and I was not very athletic as a young kid. In fact, I got made fun of for that. And then as I got older, I started, I'm like, oh, track seems fun. So I did the crazy thing of pole vaulting. I started getting used to being upside down and all this stuff and started training. And I kind of fell in love with exercise and was learning a lot through reading. But when I would go to people, everyone would have a different idea of what to do, and I got confused. I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with this. When I went to college, I started getting a little more serious and started actually training people in college. And I wasn't certified at this point, but movement started to make sense to me.
Passion started then.
Yeah, it started coming. I'm like, oh, I understand movement a little differently than other people. And I had started working with some people that were I went to Stockton, I worked with certain sports teams, which was funny. We had a great physical therapy program, but sometimes the coaches would send me their players, which
interesting.
The therapy program got mad. They're like, he's not certified.
I can imagine.
When I got done school, my degree was in criminal justice. And so while I was waiting in the interim to get called for that, I started training. And so as time went on, I started my own fitness facility. From that point, I really did love what I was doing. And so in 2009, I'll just fast forward to that point, something very interesting happened. I was hit head-on by a drunk driver in a head-on collision, and my spine at C4, C5, and C6 was almost 7.5.
Oh, my goodness.
When the medics got there, they didn't realize that I was alive still, because I was already out of the car. They're like, well, that person's not going to make it. I'm like, I'm right over here. And so I saw a gap from therapy at that point to being 100%. Now, I recovered very quickly by the grace of God, I realized at this point, but I realized if I could use the skills that I had in the past, and I had started doing gymnastics prior to the accident, so I had a very different kind of flexibility at that point, and I started rehabbing myself. So I didn't go to all this stuff. I started doing myofascial release, which was breaking down scar tissue. From that point, someone gave me the idea, why don't you start a nonprofit? You have a background in martial arts, you have a background in movement, you can use these things to help children. I said, okay. And so the Cultural Arts Training Foundation was founded in 2010. The premise of the program back then was to use movement to educate and empower. We've since kind of bridged that gap, and we use all movement, all arts to educate and empower. The demographics that we work with are everyone from disabled youth to senior citizens, because everyone has something different. People are like, well, how can you cover all these different fields? Well, we bring in contractors, so it's not just me that's teaching, but we bring in everyone from graphic designers that cover those arts, musicians. Everyone has gifts, and so we want them to stress this to different people. Some of the most basic programs are the most effective because we want to keep stuff simple.
Sure.
I find that sometimes people want to overcomplicate things to make it seem more interesting, but man keeps on trying to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to. Basic things work the best.
Okay.
So,
how did you get into motivational speaking?
Well, it's funny because I just like to talk, and I realized as time was going on, people were always asking me questions. When I pretty much came to Christ, because this goes with it, I started, people always said, like, are you a preacher? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? I started talking to more people. It really started with having one-on-one sessions, because you start doing aspects of therapy, finding out about them and talking and encouraging almost. And so from that point, I was brought into colleges to talk about business, because I was a business owner, and it just kind of came across like, oh, you're very engaging when you speak. And I go, I don't know, this is how I talk. And so I didn't think it was nothing abnormal for me. It was just how I communicated stuff, I guess, clearly to other people. So that's really when I from the foundation, we started just doing speaking events.
Okay.
At this point, we find that by speaking to youth and just people in general that are struggling, you just give them truth. I don't attribute it to myself. I glorify God, because that's really the reason I can do any of these things in the first place, from movement to the foundation to even speaking. So by using these things, it helps promote hope, confidence, little things. A lot of times people with questions that they have will answer when they start talking. They just don't hear it in their own speech. So when they start asking something, like, what did you just say? So it's a very, very interesting thing with, let's say, counseling. A person knows the answer, but they're not listening to what they're actually saying. And so I find with motivational speaking, it renews a person's hope, because they start looking at a person's testimony and they say, well, wait a minute, If you could do all this, why can't I?
Right.
And that's what someone needs. That was really the reason that I got into this. And one of the things that we do is actually get people's testimonies to help inspire others, because we go through things to help someone else.
What are some of the topics that you speak on?
Bullying, self-confidence, hope, disabilities. There's just a few. Faith. It depends on the audience that we're working with. Now we're in front of more children. We have a lot more kids with some of the schools that we've gone to speak with. I mean, the biggest thing that we're seeing now is hope.
Okay.
We find that a lot of the kids, and especially these young ages, are going through a lot, and they feel that people can't relate, or they're being ignored, or they're being judged. And so when you're just coming at them with love, and you're saying, look, I'm here for you, they're surprised. They're like, oh, you're not getting paid for this? No, I'm just here because you're more important than me. A lot of times people think that the audience or the speaker is more important than the audience. It's not. The messenger is less important than the one who's actually getting the message. And so I feel it's a gift to actually go and be able to speak to people and help them.
That's very generous. Describe your faith transition.
Well, that's an interesting story. For the majority of my life, which surprises people, I was an atheist. I didn't believe for about 20 years. As a young kid, I was inquisitive. Obviously, I asked a lot of questions. And when I didn't get answers, I was like, well, this is ridiculous. And I went to the side of, let's say, logic. So by the world's standards, I would be considered very intelligent. But I wasn't that smart because I didn't know God. That changed. I was doing medical consulting for a few years. And the reason I got into that was my wife at the time got sick. She then got really sick and passed away. So from that, I was in a dark place. I got to the point of suicide. And the most amazing thing happened. Jesus came to me. That's the best way I can. It's very hard to conceptualize an experience to people, because when he came to you, and I go, well, he laid out my life in a tapestry, and I saw every decision I ever made at one point, the good things, the bad things, people in my life that were sowing seeds. That woke me up, and from that point on, I realized how little I knew and started pursuing truth. And people go, what do you mean I was pursuing truth? Well, I started reading the Bible, which I had never done, and the amazing thing is I understood it.
Wow.
So as time went on, I started reading more and more, and stuff started making sense. And a lot of the things that I was doing before my life took a huge 180 transition. And you start to see clearly of what's actually important. And I realized that we all have truth in us. We had to learn lies. You already know the truth. To confirm truth, you have to have that in you, but you had to be taught stuff that's untrue. So as these things were surfacing in me, you start questioning all these other things that you were taught, and your life shifts dramatically. And so I'm very grateful that we can use the platform that we have at the foundation and the ministry to help people, because it gets them in. Different people are called for different things. Myself, preacher, teacher, encourager, but to be able to speak to a child, and the next day a disabled adult, the next day a senior citizen, people are put in our path. And the moment we realize that there's no chance, coincidence, or luck, you can see God's hand in your life, and your life will change at that point. But it's hard because, like I said, it's step by step. God opens our eyes. We can simply sow seeds, is what I learned very, very quickly.
Very amazing. Well, we want to have you back.
Okay.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we are going to be joined by Brittany Williams. We'll be right back.